Welcome to a Road Less Traveled podcast. I'm your host, Hillary Heron, and today we have with us Ashley Dena. Ashley, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
If you could just give us your title and what that means.
I am the executive manager at my parents' company, which is at Dena's Auto Center. It's located in Dinuba, California. That means that I am the minority ownership managing partner.
Okay.
So
amazing. Have you grown up in the car business?
I have. My dad was selling cars since before I was born. So he got in the car business at 18. You know, just a first job was selling cars, and then moved up to sales manager, moved up from there to GSM, eventually partner, and then bought out his partner in 2003. So he started in the business before I believe my sister was even born. I mean, it's just kind of been in our blood. But we were definitely never, we were not raised as dealers' kids. We were raised as a salesman's kids. You know what I mean? So the experience is a little different than others that typically sit in my seat. So,
And what made you want to stay?
in the business, I think that in the back of my mind, it was always just there. You know, I always knew that I was going to end up working for him. When I was extremely young, I think it was like 13, I went up to my dad and I was like, hey, I just need to know how much money you make. And he said, that's an incredibly inappropriate question to ask an adult. And he asked why. And I said, well, because I need to know how much money my husband's going to make.
Nice.
To make sure that I continue the life that I'm in, you know? And he said, well, the real question should be, how much money do you need to make, you know? And so from that point on, he always kind of, he made it very apparent, like, you don't need a man, you don't need a husband, you are going to be self-sufficient, you're going to be financially stable by, you know, a certain age, and that's the goal. And so when he became an owner, it became something that was tangible. You know, before that, it was just, what would I do in a dealership? You know, what would my role be? Am I going to be a salesman? There's no women on the sales team. Am I going to be a sales manager? There's no women in the sales, you know, in the sales office. And so I never really saw myself in a role. When he became a dealer, he took me to events, you know, social events that and meetings and things like that. And I was really able to see female membership in a way that I hadn't seen prior. And that got me excited about being a part of the business. I had no intention of going in right away. I know that a lot of dealers' kids are like, started at 18, washing cars, and, you know, worked my way up. And that was not me. I didn't want to jump into anything too soon, I guess. I went to college. After college, I was like, still don't want to be that serious. So, I mean, I did odd jobs and, you know, worked in various industries before committing. But it was always not only in the back of my head, that's something that I want to do, but also seeing the struggle and how hard my parents worked to get to the point that they were at. I always thought it would just be gratuitous not to try, you know, not to give it a fair shot. And so
Kind of the legacy thing.
yes, absolutely. And within the organizations that my dad was a member of, the legacy thing is huge, you know, and they push that heavily on not only the, you know, the children that attend the meetings, but also at that time on the spouses. And so it was always really it was always like really at the forefront of my thought process of long-term, what am I going to do with my life? So.
And your experience in other industries has probably helped you a lot in this business also.
Of course, yeah.
Especially as it's evolved.
Right.
Like the last 10, 15 years, I would say it's evolved quite a bit.
Yeah. I know that when Mary Barra took over, and I'm a GM franchise dealer, so, you know, my knowledge of the business is very specific to that franchise. But I remember when she took over, she said the landscape is going to change more in the next 5 years than it has in the past 25. And that was about 5 years ago, and she was 100% accurate. It's definitely evolved in a way that I don't think anybody really anticipated.
Well, and the car itself, mobility itself, the business itself, who's in the business.
Right.
I mean, I feel like it's a lot. It's a lot to manage. Just from a business perspective, add the layer of mom, right? Wife, all those things. And I have a propensity to talk about the unpaid labor that women do.
Right.
how are you managing all of the things right now? That's my least favorite question. So I really hate asking it. But I think it's important. I think the answer to it is important.
I agree. And I'm a very new mom. My son is only 13 months old at this point. But I was a stepmom for 6 it's been 6 years that I've known my husband, 7 years now. And I would say that in raising my stepkids, it's a very different experience than raising my own son. Mm-hmm. It's very different when, I have a son that's in college and, he requires so much less of my time. Mm-hmm. And my daughter that's in high school who's mobile herself, she's already of driving age. Then, an infant that is relying on me as a life source.
Yes.
So it was a much larger change than I was anticipating. I'm not going to, sugarcoat that. It was a lot more, especially time commitment. I was never had a problem prior to having my son with going in before everyone else, leaving after everyone else. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk about the hours that were put in, and I was there. Now the shift is like, okay, but what's really worth it?
At what cost?
At what cost?
Yeah.
And so that has shifted a lot in terms of just my time management and how much I'm actually in office versus at home versus on the road. Mm-hmm. It has changed. I think that anyone that says that they can handle it all is probably lying.
They have help.
Yeah.
Okay, let's call it like it is. They have help.
But I mean, even still, I remember seeing this interview, I think of Shonda Rhimes. It wasn't an interview. She was giving a commencement address and basically saying that you can't do all of the things. Mm-hmm. And it's having, acceptance for that and really, sitting with yourself and being like, what am I comfortable with?
Yeah.
What am I okay with? What am I okay with missing not only in my family's life, but what am I okay with missing in the office? What am I okay with letting someone else handle? You know what I mean? It doesn't all have to be on my desk.
Has that changed your perspective? Like when you're figuring out what you're comfortable with and what you're good 100%. With letting go?
Yeah.
Have you entrusted your team more, or has it led you to making different staffing decisions or hiring decisions?
I think that, and it's funny because when I took on the role that I currently have, Ed kind of came to me and was like, you don't need to micromanage. Mm-hmm. You need to trust that people.
What?
Yeah, exactly. No, I need to do it all.
Yeah.
And he was like, you need to trust the people that you put in these positions because you put them there for a reason, and lean on them and rely on them. They're our team, and they're on this boat with us. You know what I mean?
Everybody's got an oar. They're not paddling against you.
Right. And hopefully. And I think that in the beginning I was like, but I just kind of wanted to hold things a little too close, a little too tight. And in recognizing that I was no longer going to be able to do that, it allowed me to really see how much everyone else was capable of. Because I don't think that I was really even giving them the opportunity, to take the reins on some of the things that I was holding on to too tight.
Well, and that probably made them happy. They're able
100%.
to achieve a higher levels of performance for themselves.
Yeah. And I always said that. I mean, when my dad started taking more time away from work and people were like, oh, well, that must be weird. He only shows up, 2-3 days a week. And I'm like, no, I take that as a huge compliment. Because
now I'm a control freak. I was doing it all already.
But no, it's him saying, I trust you to take the reins from me. I trust that you are making the decisions that I would make. And for me to say that, that made the world of difference to me, that made me a better operator. Well, now it's making my team stronger because they know that they have my faith and trust. So,
well, and to kind of have that validation is, it's imperative really, right? Like, especially if legacy is part of the goal, then to have that trust, like, okay, I'm not even sure how to word that. Like there's like a feeling that comes with it that maybe isn't something that everybody experiences in their job because not everybody is in a family business.
Right.
Do you think that some of your desire to hold on to some of that was being a woman? I feel like I have to prove myself extra, or, being that you're a second generation dealer owner or dealer operator, however you want to phrase it, that you felt you could prove that to people that you had worked alongside with?
So yes and no. I think that the kind of proving it aspect had a lot more to do with my own view of myself. When it came to me starting in the business and, you know, the team that we had, you know, at that time, which has changed, you know what I mean? It's been about 10 years now since I started working for the company. At that time, any comments that were made or any kind of pushback about me being in a position that I didn't, you know, quote unquote deserve or earn or anything like that, I didn't really think too much of it because there was always a part of me that was like, fair. Like,
I know.
Yeah. Like, what did I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when I started, Ed went to his management staff and said, you know, Ashley is going to be my successor. She's going to learn the business. She's going to rely heavily on everybody in this room. I'm really excited. I can't wait for, you know, for everything that's to come. And there were people in the room that were just fired up and so excited. And, you know, this is longevity. This is, you know, our long-term plan. This is
job
so
security.
Great. Yeah, we're so excited. You know, Ed, this is what you wanted for so long. And then there were other people in the room that were like, this child is my boss. Like, she doesn't even know the business. Why? And I kind of got it. You know, I'm like, yeah, you know, that's a fair assessment.
But it is what it is.
It is what it is. And that's the thing, though. I think that Ed looked at that and was like, I don't want you to expect anyone to respect you. Because if they do, it's because they love us as a family. You know, they love the vision of the future. If they don't, it's because they don't understand it. And so you can't fault someone for questioning, you know what I mean, for looking at their position and questioning, like, why is this happening when I have worked so hard? You know what I mean? It's more an affront to who they are, right?
It sounds like he was never unclear about his intentions, though.
No, never.
So
never. I think that the biggest thing for me was I went about everything as it, like, almost like a, you know, kid wanting to learn. Like, I would ask questions, even if I already knew the answers to them. Like, I would ask them, and, you know, I always made everyone around me kind of feel like they were the best that could ever possibly be at what they were doing. Whether, I mean, I don't know if that was like,
that's a mark of a good leader, actually. So.
And see, I'm thinking, like, was that something that I was, like, taught as a child? Like, you know, just, you know, don't be disrespectful, you know, type thing. But in going through all the programming that I went through, all the, you know, quote, schooling or whatever, everything that I was sent to make you a better dealer, I would come back and try and share that with everyone on the team to show them, like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm learning. These are the things that I'm doing.
Here's the why.
Here's the why. And including them in decisions that I was making, you know, like, okay, we have to make a decision about this aspect of the business moving forward. Here are the things that I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? You know, my decision was already made half the time, but really getting them the buy-in and letting them understand my thought process so that they could understand who I was going to be as their leader moving forward.
And that, like, helps their decision making too, right? If they understand the way that you think.
Exactly.
Like they understand your voice, I guess.
Yeah. And from, like, the female aspect of it, I mean, I worked in service industry for a number of years before working at the dealership. So any comment that was ever made about me being a woman, I'm like, you cannot hurt my feelings. Like,
sorry.
Come on. I've heard it all before. Like, there's nothing that's going to offend me at that point. I think that it hurt Ed and Ida a little bit more. And probably Ed more so because Ida, you know, as a female, she understood.
Yeah.
But it's almost like he didn't anticipate any pushback. And so seeing or hearing from male colleagues and their question of my competence or my abilities. And his response was like, well, they're not questioning, you know, his son or his son. They're the same age. Like, why are you questioning my daughter? Like, why isn't she any more capable? And for me, I'm like, well, I get it. but he didn't get it. You know, he was very much so hurt by it in a way that I don't think he really understood at the time. I think that now, years later, we kind of laugh about some of the comments that were made, or, you know, we just kind of, you know, throw it off like, that happened. But
it was hurtful.
I think at the time it was hurtful for him. It was hurtful because it was the implication that that things would be different had I been a son and not a daughter.
And not only that his decision making wasn't. He had chosen you as his successor, and people saying things about or questioning your competence questions his 100%. Competence or his decision making, and frankly, it's unacceptable. Really,
and that's the thing. I think that the people that were members of our organization that had questions about it, coincidentally, no longer work for us, and it had nothing to do with me. I mean, everything happens for a reason and in its own due time. But it's very much so that it's, you know, if you don't trust the captain of the ship, then what are you doing? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't like your coach, why are you on the team? And so, it was difficult, but it was at the same time, you really start to understand people's character.
Yeah.
I think that the female aspect of it over time has evolved. The age part of it has evolved as well. I mean, like we talked about earlier, I have 2 stepkids. I have 1 child of my own. I'm married. We got a house. I mean, I'm much more settled than when I entered this business at, 25, 26 years old. Like, I work here.
Yeah.
And to say I'm nearing my 40s is very different than I'm 25.
Right.
I'm in my 20s.
100%.
And I think that people who are much more established in this business do look at the age aspect of it. When you're very young, and it's kind of questioning your seriousness.
Yeah.
Which, again, I kind of understood that too, because only 2 years prior I was
not very serious about it. Yeah. My experience with that particular thing is that they middle-aged white guys in the car business, the majority of men in the car business, they'll look at the next gen guys a little bit differently. They look at the next gen girls. And for California specifically, we are very fortunate to have a number of women involved in the next gen program.
Right.
Specifically through the state association, and to have a lot more female car dealers. But it's difficult to look for a female car dealer who's a mentor. Like, they're few and far between. Grenée, she was on a few weeks ago, and I don't know if you remember her from Washington, D.C., but she, we were talking about minority car dealers, and she was like, there's only 6, and I've said this statistic 1,000 times now since we talked about it. There's only 6 Black female car dealers in the United States for new cars. And that statistic blows my mind.
Yeah.
I guess this is dual faceted, right? It's minority thing and the being younger thing,
right? And
being female. So even if you're female, you're the same age as a guy in the next gen program, they look at him as more viable than you.
Yeah.
Is having more women around, has that made it easier for you to stick, or were you going to stick anyway?
I was going to stick anyway. I think that it does kind of, it makes you view things differently though, right? I was fortunate enough that my dad, a group that he is a member of, has some very strong female operators in. One of which I've had multiple conversations with her, and she is probably like the biggest powerhouse of a female that I've ever met. I mean, she's got, I think, 8 or 9 stores in like 5 different states or something crazy like that. I mean, she's fantastic, and she's first generation. Her story is incredible, but it's one of those things. It's like, well, she looks like me type thing. And she comes from similar background, and she has attained and amassed all of this success. The thing that's interesting about women like that is that the humility aspect is very prevalent.
There's no entitlement.
Not at all. And that's the thing is like when you think about, okay, there's only, so from the GM perspective, because I know their numbers a little bit better than, the whole of like the, NADA numbers, I guess. GM has, I believe the 2022 census was 4,035, 4,036 rooftops. And of those, 8% are minority owned, 7% are female owned, but 0.6% are women who are minorities. Or minorities who are also women. I mean, it's 0.6%, right?
But the women number has also gone down.
Right. Now, here's the other caveat to that, though, is how does one become a dealer? And when we're talking about generational businesses and legacy companies, it's not something you can just break into.
Yeah.
Of those 4,000, and plus some rooftops, they don't make more of them. There are only so many in existence, and only those are available for ownership. And at any given point, someone will at some point say, I don't have a line of succession. I don't have a plan. I'm going to sell. Now, in that instance, would you sacrifice your own self-interest and sell to someone who does not have the financial backing that, some larger auto group would have, right?
That's becoming more and more uncommon.
Exactly. And so to those dealers who are trying to be, trying to break into the business, you really have to, like the female that I was talking about earlier, like my dad, work for someone who believes in you and is willing to sell to you rather than taking the big money from someone else. Because they believe in you and believe in your dream and believe that you can take their company, in the same direction that they would want it to go in, right? But at the same time, it's few and far between. That doesn't happen.
And the programs that the manufacturers, and by manufacturer I mean like the automaker, like General Motors or in our case Jaguar Land Rover, whoever has in place, are almost I hesitate to say it this bluntly, but they almost exist just to exist.
You're talking about for path to ownership?
Yeah. We have this program for women. We have this program for minorities. Like, then those programs are almost make it worse because you're like, okay, here are these additional flaming hoops that you have to jump through.
Right. So yes and no. And it's something that in my experience, I have learned over time that it's very individualized for everyone, right? I used to think that the path that I took was the only path that one could take as a female who was also a minority wanting to either buy her own store or, get on paragraph third for succession, right? I have since learned that that's not always the case, right? For whatever reason. What are those reasons? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what makes one person eligible for ownership without jumping through, quote unquote, jumping through all the hoops that I did. Now, all of that being said, everything that because I am dealer approved through the one of the programs that you're speaking of, which is through General Motors. It's through their minority dealer development. It was a very lengthy process. Took just over a year. Most people that I have spoken to that have gone through that do not, quote unquote, pass on their first round.
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to have passed the first time around. That being said, if it was a year plus for me, for some of, my male counterparts that have been through it that I've already had conversations with, they've done it 2 or 3 times. And you're talking about years and years and years of trying to get approved, right? Whereas someone, who's a majority owner and their son wants to take over, you just sign the little piece of paper and you're done.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case either. There have been some instances, even in our, in our immediate area, where a dealer moves on or passes or, something happens, and there are requirements made by the manufacturer to take over ownership.
A lot of the a lot of the agreements or the contracts for the franchises are changing.
Exactly. And I also know minority owners that did not have to go through the interview process or the simulation process or any of the vetting that I had to go through.
As long as they could prove the cash in their bank account.
Well, and see, that's the other thing is that I know some that had well over enough and still had to go through it. I know that
maybe it's like a lottery.
And that's the thing is that it's really, there's no rhyme or reason. I don't know what the reasoning is. I couldn't tell you. You know, I wish that I had, you know, some kind of like, I wish I was able to like peek behind the curtain and ask all those questions. I don't. I have no idea. All I know is that the path that I took was implied that it was required. All that to be said, it sharpened me. It made me stronger. And I am very thankful that I went through it because all of those requirements, all of those extra hoops, all of those extra steps, the only thing it did was make me better.
Yeah.
The only, you know, when I went to, you know, my next meetings or, you know, the next functions that I was speaking to someone and they're like, you passed on your first round? Like, oh my gosh. I'm like, yes, I am phenomenal. Like, and so that's the thing is it gave me even more confidence in what I was doing. And, you know, it kind of solidified to me, like, I know that I'm capable, but now everybody in that room thinks I'm capable too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have, you know, been vindicated in some way, you know?
I mean, your perspective on it is what changes the game, really. Right. For not just for you, but even for the people like around you, or encouraging people to come into the business and saying like, yes, this is difficult, but you don't have to look at it this way. You can look at it this way.
Right.
Did you have any specific mentors other than your dad, obviously, who made a big impact on your career?
It's funny because, I mean, obviously my dad from like the business perspective, but in terms of encouraging me to join, to actually get into the business and not just be the daughter or, you know, to actually like, you can do this and you absolutely should, was more coming from Ida than Ed, which was my mother. When my parents purchased the dealership, they joined the Minority Association. At the time, it was not called Dealer Development. It was called the Minority Association. And at that point in time, which was in 2003, they had a very strong spouse program. And all of the women would get together and, I mean, they would get together throughout the year and, you know, do fundraisers or, you know.
They became friends.
They became friends, through a series of events. But what that did was allow them, and at the time it was all female spouses, you know, and it allowed them to kind of get together and support each other and say, yeah, we all get it. This sacrifice is bad. The time is bad. Like, they're gone. We get it. But this is the end goal, and this is the legacy piece, and this is why we're getting the kids involved. And it was through that association and through those relationships that the narrative was very different for us growing up. It wasn't, oh, dad's still at work. It was, oh my gosh, like, dad's got this thing going on at work, and it's so great, and he's working so hard, and that's why I can attend literally everything. Yeah. That's why I get to be, you know, the PTA, you know, the head of the PTA, and that's why I get to show up to all of the recitals and all of the things, because the dealership provides it for us. The dealership is providing us this life. It's so great.
The perspective is different. There isn't
absolutely
there isn't a resentment there.
Not at all. And so that influence, I feel like it can kind of go either way.
It does.
And so, and so having a mother that was just so encouraging about the car business, that made a huge impact because it would have been very easy to get angry.
Yeah.
And
especially
we didn't.
Dad's not around all the time.
Right.
Well, and also him not being around all the time indirectly tells you that you need to have your fingers in and on everything.
Exactly.
So unlearning
that. Oh, 100%.
It's probably a struggle.
And I think that was a conversation that we had very early on. I think it was like around year 3 or 4. You know, I kind of went to him and I was like, I want to be here. You know, I want to do as much as I'm doing. Like, I have absolutely no problem with that. But I am recognizing that I am finding less and less joy in my life. And I don't think that it needs to be like a work-life balance. You know what I mean?
I don't even believe in the balance.
No, there's no such thing. But it's as much a part of who I am, right? But I was finding less and less joy in the other things. And it was becoming all about work.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I need to take a step and find a hobby or, do
I need to either take up knitting or get a therapist.
Yeah, I need
something.
to figure something out that is outside of work that I'm finding enjoyment in. And he was very supportive of that and was like, no, I completely agree. He said, and we had a very candid conversation about it where he was like, I look back sometimes, not with regret, but how much did I actually miss?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. Because I wasn't there, I don't know what I was actually missing.
Valid.
And so it was very therapeutic for us to have that conversation, for him to recognize, how much time he spent away, not just out of necessity, but also to a certain extent out of choice. You know what I mean? It is a choice. And so,
like he tells you, rely on the team that you put in place.
Exactly.
You're like, same.
And I think that was the thing, is that he and my mom eventually got to a point in their marriage where they decided, we want to change the way that we're living our lives.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so him and her really changing the way that they flowed through life, it allowed, by the time that I got there, he was very much so like, don't make it all about the work.
Yeah.
I've learned way too late in life that you shouldn't make it all about the work. There has to be some reprieve.
So what are your reprieves? What are the things that you do for joy, for fun, to?
So that's
other than work.
Like I just sit on my phone.
Yeah, right. I doom scroll so that I don't have to think.
Right. No, it's funny because I think about it sometimes when it's like, do you have friends? I'm like, well, I'm really close with my parents.
Yeah, same.
It's actually really good for us to spend time together, not at work, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
I work with them all day, every day. But when we can go over to my parents' house and just have a couple bottles of wine and just relax, it kind of brings everything back into perspective. You know what I mean? We'll probably break away. My dad and I will go and have a little chat, you know what I mean, at the end of the night. But it just brings everything back down. And it allows us to remember that, hey, I'm not just your successor. I'm not just your partner. I'm not just your employee. At the end of the day, I'm still your kid.
Yeah.
I'm your daughter first and foremost. And it allows us to kind of get back to that, which you'd think okay, the last thing you want to do is go and hang out with the people you work with. But in that different setting,
I know
it
better.
just makes everything so much better. Yeah. And then my husband and I, we bought property a few years ago. And every now and then when each of us have had a bad day, it's like, you want to just get a bottle of wine, just go for a ride on the golf cart, go out to the preserve and just kind of just chill for a minute.
What are you doing? I'm drunk in the grass.
Not like that, but it's just let's go and listen to some birds. Let's just
Nature.
Get grounded a bit.
Yeah.
And recognize what's really important here, because at the end of the day, it's not helping him or me any to just sit there and dwell on what's stressing us out. Let's release it and enjoy, what we have together.
And you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
100%.
You have to do things that refill it or recharge you.
Yeah.
And generationally, I feel like some of that was lost, right? My dad was very much the same. It was very much I have to be there, I have to be working, and I have to be doing this, and I have to be doing that. And, we're smart enough to listen. If,
right.
I'm tooting my own horn, that it doesn't have to be that way. And there is no glory in that.
No. And that's the thing though, is, you think about the way that the landscape has changed and how many dealers' kids are leaving the business. You're talking about generational businesses, third, fourth generations. You're talking about people that, I know a gal who is in Newfoundland, Canada, and her predecessors or worked on the Model T. You're talking generation long businesses, right? And then you get to a point that your child doesn't want to take it over. It's almost like the whole like millennials don't want to work these days, that age old thing. But it's like, well, we saw you bury yourself, you just literally
we didn't see you.
Or we didn't see you at all, and it's, why would I want that life? And that's again where, Ida being who she was, not only as a wife and as a mother, but really being encouraging, and having those other women around her that were like, it's about legacy. It's about generational business. You really need to push this. Like, we got to have like eye on the prize type thing, because otherwise you're just looking at your parents who you may or may not know all that well.
Yeah.
And it's like, why would I even do that?
Well, and I think especially in the automotive world, like community is so important.
So important.
And dealers have gotten lost now, especially in our area. They've gotten lost in their own little silos where they don't want to be a part of the community of dealers.
Right.
And that gets very lonely. It gets isolating. And even I was heavily involved in that. And even then it can feel very isolating. You're, still most of the people don't look like you kind of deal.
Right.
Changing the definition of what it means to be a car dealer, I think, is what's so imperative in continuing to keep the business model successful.
Right.
Right? Like, you can do both. You don't have to do it all.
Right.
Which is not typically the culture in a dealership.
Right.
Do you find that your younger staff are better at that?
It's so funny because I think about my staff as a whole, and I remember at one of the events that you and I attended together. This was probably 3 years ago now. There was a speaker talking about generational businesses, but the fact that for the first time ever, we have multiple generational groups within one roof, right? So obviously Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, Boomer, in some cases even the silent generation, all working under one roof. And you can't change the way people think, right? But if someone has an open mind from the beginning, it doesn't really matter what age they are or what bracket they fall in, right? So some of my, senior managers who are older from the beginning have always had like that, we're just going to pivot and move, or, what's the next thing? Like, the business is changing. I got to stay on top of it if I'm going to stay relevant.
They're a little more progressive.
100%. Yeah. But I mean, again, the business has changed in and of itself. Like, I mean, every now and then I'll be, talking with my dad about some compliance issue or, I know, so something that's, changing on like the like legal side of doing business. And he's like, man, it's just not as fun. I just want to sell cars.
That's,
that
echoes in my head from my own dad.
And that's the thing, is like the business itself has changed. And so for some of those, older generation guys, they're like, this isn't fun. This isn't what I signed up for. Like, this isn't the way it used to be. But for the people coming into the business, you have to recognize, that this landscape has changed. It's not what I grew up in. It's a very different role than it used to be. And is it something that excites me, or is it something that frightens me?
It's also something that it's almost all that though.
Right.
Like, in your professional life, as like in the role of the person that takes it all on, it's kind of the only thing that so far.
Right.
So
I don't know what it was like back
maybe
in the
you'll
day.
get burned out later. But for right now, you're like, yeah, no, it's cool. I got the energy for it. I got it.
Right. Yeah. It's very different when guys talk about, well, back, it's old school was this, that, and the other. And I'm like, that doesn't even sound remotely enjoyable to me.
And also, I don't think that's real. Like, whatever you were talking about, that couldn't have been the way that things
definitely
happened.
Like memories you always look at with like rose-colored glasses.
100%.
And so, but no, I mean, I like when you were talking about community, it's so interesting because when we were in, we were at convention, someone had mentioned that I recently took on a role, and I said, oh yeah, I was voluntold from Hillary. And you're like,
not what happened.
And you're like, that's not, I'm pretty sure I just asked. But that's the thing. I think that at the time it's like, yeah, I kind of was voluntold because anything that you asked me to do, I was like, I got to do it.
Well, I appreciate that, but I know you don't actually feel like you had to.
No, but it's almost like I remember having a conversation early on with my sister, and she's like, do you really need to do all this extra stuff? Mm-hmm. Like, what is it? Is it necessary? Like, why?
Well, define necessary. Is it necessary for what? Is it necessary for my survival? No.
No, not at all. But at the same time, there are so many things changing within the business, and there's so many things that people aren't aware of almost. You know, there's a lot of dealers that are kind of just flowing with it, but they don't recognize that they have the ability to make actual change.
Elena Sweet and I talked about this exact issue. When you don't think that you can go talk to a legislator and make sense of what your problem is until you go and do it.
Right. And so many, and I mean, anyone, not even in the automotive industry, in any industry, I'm sure can recognize that sometimes laws get passed and they don't understand why someone would logically have voted the way that they did, right? And it's
because that's not how it logically functions in the real world.
Exactly. But that's the thing. Sometimes it just makes the difference of a conversation because they may not fully understand or comprehend everything that we fully understand and comprehend, and how like the ripple effects, you know, will change business, right? And so when it comes to, you know, going and having those conversations and talking to legislators, I mean, how many times have we been in a room and they're like, I didn't even know it did that, or I don't even know what that means.
I mean, literally every time.
And how could they? You know what I mean? When you have so many things coming across your desk and so many people feeding you information and you're trying to, you know, keep track of all of it, you're going to make the best decision or, you know, vote in the best way that you think that you feel or that you believe is right. But if you haven't heard the perspective of the people that it's going to directly affect, then how would you know?
I think that's completely valid. And it brings up a larger question, which we won't get too far into, but why are people qualified to make those decisions, first of all? And second of all, when they are making big sweeping decisions, why not engage? Why not more proactively engage the groups? Like, for example, with like the EV transition,
right?
Talk to dealers, talk to consumers,
right?
Like, can we just talk about how it's going to impact people?
Right.
Because I can't get from point A to point B, and I'm afraid of putting my kids in that thing.
Right. And that I think that's the thing is that it's when you look at those like large decisions, especially like, I mean, EV is just this whole thing.
It's a conundrum.
I mean, we could go off on EV, but it's one of those things. It's like maybe they spoke to who they thought they were, you know, who they thought were the people that would give them all the answers. You know, there were conversations had. It's just that
who were they with?
And why did it go in the direction that it went? Who knows? I wasn't privy. I wasn't a fly on the wall. I wish I was.
Same.
But at the same time, it's like that's why the involvement in organizations like NADA is so imperative. You know what I mean? The only reason that we have the strength that we do as a dealer body is because we're organized, you know? And without having a number of dealers that are passionate and very involved, those organizations don't function.
100%.
Right?
Well, and if they are not functioning, then the greater need, and for me, it was more of like, this isn't what my consumer wants. Like,
right.
And if this isn't what my consumer wants, how do I employ these 65 people? And if I employ 65 people who have like an average of 3.25 people in their family, look at how it's affecting all of these people.
Right.
And that was the driver to have conversations about that stuff. Like, if we don't have that, then I don't know. It's anarchy.
And that's the thing. I mean, it's sometimes sometimes I think that laws get passed because those that are in office think that they're doing something good by the American people, right? Yeah. When it comes to to like the EV landscape, I don't believe that all was considered to the extent that it should have been. And most importantly, the consumers. Because if there was a demand or a want or a need, then I believe, I feel like it would be much more favorably embraced. You know, I think that the early adopters were really excited about it, and that's wonderful.
But that's probably who they, and that's who they are as a person.
Right. And that's the thing. I think that that to appeal to the masses, you need to understand where they are at right now. You know what I mean? What are their needs currently? What are the price point that they can afford on these vehicles? You know what I mean? If we're trying to appeal to the commuter, well, what is their price point? You know?
Almost none of the EVs were affordable until like last week.
And that's the thing, is that I think that there was a lot of excitement surrounding EV from the non-consumer, non-dealer side. And
it was novel and interesting, and it had a good story.
Right.
But it didn't have any reality.
And that's the thing, is that like it's almost like going to, you know, okay, so we've all been to college. Like it's like going to business school and learning business theory. Yeah. Right? It's not always applicable.
Almost nothing.
Right.
The way that it's taught in our traditional system is the way that it exists in the real world.
And that's the thing, is that there's and not just the EV, there are so many decisions that are made about our business that are outside of our control, that sometimes I just kind of sit there and I'm like,
what are you doing?
What? Why? And it's like, okay, or we're just going to pivot and move. We're going to go with it. And eventually they're going to figure it out. Which, if we're paying attention to anything happening in EV, they're figuring it out.
The pullback has been phenomenal and necessary. And you know, from my perspective as a consumer, the safety equipment isn't there, which is my main hang up if I'm driving my kids. And I think those are things we didn't talk about. Multiple conversations with multiple legislators that are like, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. But why not?
But that's the thing, is if you don't know which questions to ask, you're not, you know what I mean? How would you even go about asking them? And that's the thing. It's who's asking the question and who's giving them the answers. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, well, were there any follow-up questions to that? You know, it's the safety. It's also the weight, the maintenance. It's the safety of the technicians working on them.
That is a big deal.
There's so many things that people aren't considering when they have these, you know, grandiose plans of this will make the world a better place.
Well, and there was one specific brand, which we will not call out by name, that positioned themselves really well. So they positioned themselves as a luxury tech brand. It had nothing to do with the car or the mobility or making the world better. No. And that's really attractive. That was really attractive specifically to younger people. And the people that I know that have purchased a specific brand are kind of ride or die. They're either ride or die or complete deflectors, but a lot of them are like committed to this idea that they have. And I agree. It's very emotional. It's very romantic.
100%, yeah.
But it isn't reality.
Yeah. I mean, the emotional side of it is everything. Because if you're talking about purchases within lifetime, if you are a person who never buys their own home, the vehicle that you purchase is likely the largest purchase you will ever make. You know, and if you do buy your own home, cars coming in second. If you're fortunate enough to own other things that are more expensive, then like yay for you, right?
Right, but you're like, that's like the 1%.
Exactly. So. Majority of people in this country will have a very large decision to make when it comes to buying their car. And to say that that is not emotional is a farce. I mean, you are spending how much time in this thing? It's not just driving you from point A to point B. It's where you take your kids to soccer or, the car that you drove on that road trip, where, you met your husband, whatever it is. Anything.
It's where you conceived your second child.
Yes. All of the things, right? And so most people make the decision on the test drive because it's when you get behind the wheel, you can feel yourself in it. You're like, yes, this is my...
You see it in your life.
You feel it, right? Now, the people that are making the decision to purchase without having that option, well, they've already built all of this up in their head before it even gets to them, right?
Right. They've
created a narrative. You know what I mean? They've created the emotional, this whole relationship, exists before that purchase even technically comes to fruition.
How disappointing. Based on what I've heard about that relationship.
But that's the thing is that when it comes to even the vehicles that we're driving today that are not, coming from a specific, that aren't from a tech company or that aren't from an EV only brand, or an EV only sect of a brand, right? They are still more, technological than they've ever been, right? Most of our, service technicians are just that. They're techs.
Yep.
They're not mechanics. I mean, to say that it's not hard labor
isn't really a thing.
Yeah. To say that it's not hard would be so disrespectful. I mean, these guys and gals are, still doing hard labor. You know what I mean?
I can't even use my iPhone, so I can't even imagine trying to technologically figure out but that's 5 or 6 brains in a car.
Right. And that's the thing, right, is that sometimes your phone acts funny. It just, for whatever reason.
It updated.
Yeah, okay.
Or it needs an update.
Now what, right? It's doing something that doesn't make any sense, and that's your phone. Your car is the larger version of that.
Yeah.
And so there's so many times that it's like, oh, well, it's not doing this, or it's acting funny, or this is happening. It's like, it's a computer. Even if it's not fully EV, even if it's not, the vehicles themselves have developed at an accelerated rate to meet what they believe is consumer, or the consumer's wants and needs, what the manufacturers believe consumers would like.
Do they, though? Because the consumers don't want it. And we're seeing that over and over and over again. It's from now from the outside for me.
Right.
Watching companies chase the stock price to the detriment of society, almost. Well, that's a little dramatic, but you get my point.
Of course.
It's fascinating and it's terrifying. And I think that there are a lot of big questions that I personally have around all of this about how are we going to responsibly dispose of these things? What happens when their useful life is over?
Right.
What happens when you can't recycle them anymore?
Right.
They go into the ground. Well, the ground grows the tree. The water goes in the ground, and that moves around, and then that grows the trees, and then it's back in the air.
Yeah.
And that's an oversimplification of science, but I don't know how that works. But,
yeah.
And then people hold on to their internal combustion engines longer. The longer those cars are on the road, the more polluting they are. We're not making anything better.
No.
It's going to force the average life of a car on the road to be longer.
Yes.
Which is going to be more polluting.
Correct.
And then the question is about mobility, right? Is this a play to control mobility?
And that's the interesting thing. When you see some of these articles coming out about some manufacturers and what their vehicles are capable of doing at the mercy of the manufacturer, it's it's a little unsettling.
It's frightening at best.
And it's a question of how much do you want to give up?
Yeah.
I think that decisions have been made, over the past, 30 years or so that I feel like we've just gotten comfortable with how much technology we have introduced into our lives, right? And that's fine. When it comes to the the safety side of it, then you start to have questions.
Yeah.
You know? And it's becoming more and more apparent that maybe that safety was a bit of an afterthought for some brands.
I'm okay being complicit-ish, right? Like, I have my phone and I like being able to, drown out my thoughts with doom scrolling.
Of course.
But it is still, I remember when the self-driving conversation first happened, and we were probably still in high school. And I was like, well, what if somebody's really mad and like hacks into my car and like drives me off a pier? And I have not gotten any less creepy since then. So some of it scares me.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it doesn't help that, and it's one of those things. I mean, you see it in media, as well. You see it in movies and in, television series that come out that, the cars turn on you in some way or
AI.
Or it's working, in the benefit of someone else and not the person, in control of it. And of course, I mean, it's like the movie AI came out when we were like kids, right? Yeah. And so
how long had it been around for them to make a movie about it?
And that's the thing is like we've been having this conversation for decades now.
Yeah.
And it's just I think that the more practical conversation, at least in something that we can control, has to be about how quickly things are shifting, how lucrative it is for the company, for the manufacturers. Because I mean, at the end of the day, they do have a bottom line.
Yeah.
And is this lucrative for you or is ICE or is hybrid? Like, what is the better decision for not only the consumer, but also for you as a company moving forward?
Where's the balance?
Where's the balance? Yeah. And for consumers, it's, are you ready for, the fully electric future, or do you need some time?
And do use that transition technology.
Exactly.
Like, so everybody can get on board. If you want to make
100%.
a real change, I mean, you don't just walk up to somebody and cut their hair off and be like, you have short hair now. Like, that's terrifying.
No, and especially with, say you get your license at 16 or 18, and you're in your 40s. Okay, so you've been driving for how long? And you've made that many habits. And these are your norms, and this is where you like to stop. And this is how, everyone says, don't let it get below a quarter of a tank. How often do you do that? So it's
can't talk about it.
It's not just changing, like, do they want it? Do they need it? Anything like that. It's, you've got 20 plus years of experiences and habits and, things that you do on a daily basis that are just so ingrained in your routine. And we will now change that routine. And how well will you adapt to that change? Some people very easily, some people not so much.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for the rest of, for other aspects of your life? A lot of these vehicles do require a different kind of maintenance. They require, people are like, well, I can just go and get a fast charge. Okay, well, what does that do to the life of the vehicle? What does it do to,
what does it do to the grid? Okay.
Right.
We already can't power our homes in the summer here.
Right.
So, I mean, what was Texas last year, 2 years ago? It's like, don't charge your cars. What?
Yeah. No, I mean, that was in California as well.
To, like, jumping around whenever I want.
Right. And that's the thing is it's a larger conversation. And then there's also the infrastructure. You know what I mean? I know that California has just passed a number of things that will encourage the ability for, low income apartment complexes to have charging in their parking lots. But is that the consumer? Is that who can afford the vehicle? I mean, are we wasting taxpayer money on infrastructure that doesn't directly impact the auto intenders that are going to buy these vehicles?
Well, in my opinion, yes. And where you put these chargers is a big deal. The things that they use to make these chargers that are inside of them are valuable.
Right.
Ours was damaged immediately.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, then what's the maintenance?
Right.
Then what?
Right.
You know, and where you're putting them, is there supervision of them,
Right.
or are people able to damage them for funsies? I mean, because a lot of like you see parking lots, right? There will be like a big bank, but it's kind of off to the side or behind a building. It's hidden. It's then what? Like,
right.
Then you don't know until after,
right?
If something is wrong, I guess.
And that's the thing is that I think that there are like kind of like the hot topics, you know, EV obviously being one of them that get focused on from like the legislative standpoint, because it's like it's the thing that that's the buzz. It's the thing everyone's talking about. And it's like, how much better would our resources be spent if we could just figure out how to get, you know, the rest of the airbag recalls, you know, taken care of.
Oh God.
You know what I mean?
What are we, like 10 years into that now?
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that there are still vehicles on the road that have not had the airbag recall completed yet. I mean, that feels like a far more imperative, you know, thing to focus on.
Yeah.
You know, as a state, you know.
But we're past that now. We're over it.
Exactly. It's no longer something that's newsworthy. And so it's like, okay, but as dealers, as you know, as living in the community that we live in, should we just say like, it's one of those things. It's like, you have to get involved. You have to start speaking to the people that are making the decisions on what consumers and legislators are focusing on, because again, it comes down to the education. It's like, they don't know what questions to ask.
You don't know what you don't know.
How does somebody in a vehicle that they bought at a used car dealership, right? Say they went to an independent, bought a used car, they're driving it. They have no idea there's an airbag recall on it.
True.
I mean, whose responsibility is it to inform that person? Like, how do we go about making the public aware that this is not a resolved issue yet? You know, it's still ongoing, and it's still kind of got, you know, a question mark at the end of it. And it's the airbag recall, or, you know, road safety, you know what I mean? The weight capacity of these roads as they change with, you know, the increase of the weight of the vehicles. I mean, a bunch of topics that we could bring up to the public that is probably far more important than just the buzzworthy things that get a lot of media attention.
Education. All the things that were not taught in school, but that was a conversation for a different day. I'm super grateful for your participation and your candid discussion. And I think that a lot of this conversation is probably even bigger conversations. And thank you. Just thank you for your perspective and for being here. And I hope we can have another conversation again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
A huge thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their stories, wisdom, and breaking down barriers with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support means the world to me and helps spread the word about the amazing women paving the road less traveled in male-dominated industries. If you have suggestions for a future guest or topic you'd like me to explore, please reach out on social media. I'd love to hear from you. Follow me on your favorite social platform for updates and behind the scenes. Keep pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and lifting each other up.